people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. The rumor mill is spinning, and what it's spinning is that in late April, unbeaten up-and-comer Caroline Dubois may be taking on Uruguay's own Mayra Moneo.
This is what I said would happen.
Initially, Caroline was eyeing a fight with Rhiannon Dixon for what is the newly vacated IBF title, but it turned out that Rhiannon was already en route for the newly vacated WBO title, leaving Caroline Dubois to deal with Beatriz Ferreira, and she didn't want to do that. She didn't want to fight her. So now, both the WBO and IBF titles look to be staying on the Matchroom side of things, and Caroline will be taking on Mayra Moneo in late April. Rumor has it that's the same day that Beatriz Ferreira will be taking on Yanina Lascano
For the IBF.
No word if Caroline's fight with Mayra Moneo is going to be for an alphabet title of any kind.
A full title, not a trinket. Not an interim, not a secondary belt.
A full belt. Mayra Moneo sports a professional record of 14 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 3 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 15 professional bouts. And professionally, she has a lot more experience and more rounds in the bank than young Caroline Dubois. But Caroline is the one who exhibits more talent, more form, sporting a professional record, an unblemished record of 9 wins with no losses, no draws, 5 knockouts.
She's racked up more knockouts in 9 fights than Mayra has in 15.
Having seen both in action, I do think it's safe to say that Caroline Dubois is a bigger puncher than Mayra Moneo, that in terms of single punching power, there's more power in a single punch from Caroline Dubois than there is in a single punch from Mayra Moneo.
And Mayra does like to throw a lot of punches, but she doesn't crack as hard as Caroline Dubois.
Caroline, who saw action 3 times last year, 3 times, and she's already seen action once, this one, last in action in February of this year opposite the ring, Miranda Reyes.
Caroline last saw action in February of this year, whereas Mayra last saw action in December of last year.
Both have seen action within the last 12 months. The stylistic matchup between them pits the boxer-puncher against the pressure-fighter, with Caroline Dubois being the boxer-puncher and Mayra Moneo being the pressure-fighter.
That stylistic matchup favors Caroline Dubois. It favors the boxer-puncher.
And what is a respectable matchup against a fighter that, at least as a professional, is more experienced than Caroline. More fights, more rounds in the bank.
Though not more talent.
Mayra Moneo is not a more talented fighter than Caroline Dubois, does not exhibit as high a ceiling, and even as far as pressure fighters go, she's still crude. She's still rough around the edges, missing a few bells and whistles.
The fight between them.
How will the fight between them look? Well, Mayra Moneo, as stated, she's a pressure fighter, volume puncher, likes to crowd the pocket and let her hands go. But you will notice that a good number of those punches are arm punches. She's not always driving her shots, so there's not always that much mustard on them.
Not as much power as what you see in Caroline's punches.
Combinations from Mayra Moneo, they are messy, often overshooting the distance, getting in too close to her opponent, and collapsing the pocket,
resulting in clinches.
A lot of holding. It can get messy. Though in a general sense, that's what has been working for Mayra Moneo. Volume punching, crowding the pocket, and overwhelming the opponent with activity. Thus, how will Caroline Dubois respond?
You will notice that Mayra's a take one to give one kind of fighter.
To get off her punches, get off her flurries, she's willing to take one to give one, taking 1 or 2 punches on the way in as she's barreling forward. But Caroline Dubois cracks a lot harder than the girls that Mayra has been fighting.
Distance control.
Carolyn's got better legs, better footwork than a Mayra Moneo. Not limited to just coming forward. She can create space to land hard punches on Mayra.
It's the advantage the boxer puncher has over the pressure fighter. They can box when they need to and punch when they need to.
It's the assignment for Carolyn. She's got to pace herself as to not become overwhelmed by Mayra Moneo's constant come-forward aggression.
Create space and pick her off.
Don't give her a stationary target. Don't just stand in one spot. Give yourself enough room to get off your shots and drive your shots. So when they land with authority.
Do some damage.
Carolyn Dubois plays her cards right against Mayra Moneo. This could be target practice and a strong display of not only Carolyn's accuracy, but Carolyn's power.
It's all about managing the distance.
The caveat being that sometimes scrappers, like a Mayra Moneo, these disorganized fighters, they have a way of making an otherwise polished boxer become flustered.
Forcing them to work, forcing them to fight.
So you have to keep your cool, control the distance at which the fight is being fought, and only get into exchanges on your terms and not hers.
Edge goes to Carolyn Dubois.
Stylistically and physically, I think she has what it takes to win this fight. Set to go down in late April. We'll talk more about it as the fight date approaches. In men's super middleweight news, David Benavidez caught wind of Canelo Alvarez's recent comments, how he being David Benavidez, doesn't bring anything to the table, and for 150 to 200 million, sure, he'd fight the guy. He'd fight the guy tomorrow for that amount of money. To that, David said, if I have nothing to offer, then why are you demanding you get 150 to 200 million to fight someone who isn't worth anything? Hopefully after you make that 150 million, you have enough left over to buy a pair of nuts.
That's rich coming from him.
You're trying to say Canelo ain't got no nuts?
Huh?
He ain't got no cojones? Then you explain it. How did he get to Caleb Plant before you did, when you were on the same side of the street as him, and you were there first?
You were both champions.
Unbeaten champions on the same side of the street, fighting on the same network. If Canelo's the one that ain't got no nuts, how did he get to Caleb before you did when you were there first?
If he ain't got no nuts.
Why did you have to wait for Canelo to knock him out to fight him?
Just so that you wouldn't knock him out.
If Canelo Alvarez is the one who ain't got no nuts, why did he unify a division that you were already in
Before him.
in just 11 months, under one calendar year? You were there at super middleweight for years. You were there through 2 cycles of champions.
You were there for George Groves. You were there for Zerto Ramirez. You were there for Jose Uzcategui. You were there for Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders.
Not a single unification match to show for it. If Canelo Alvarez is the one who's lacking cojones, if he's the one who needs to buy himself some nuts, how did he unify this entire division before you, and you were already there? You were already there for years. If Canelo is the one who ain't got no nuts, the older, smaller fighter, you tell me how he's been to light heavyweight 2 times against 2 champions, and you're just now getting around to doing that.
And it's not for a champion, a current reigning champion, it's for a former champion.
The 2 times Canelo Alvarez went up to light heavyweight, Canelo, who's noticeably smaller and older than David, both times he went up there, it was for guys that had belts, that were holding belts, reigning champions. David,
That's not what David's doing.
he's not the kind of guy David's fighting. See, it's all well and good on social media to say whatever comes to mind.
Sounds good.
Some people are going to egg David Benavidez on. Some people are going to support him, but not a single one of them can disprove what I just said.
They're gonna watch this video. They're gonna get mad at me. They're gonna try to deflect.
They always do, because what they really want is for me to come around to their way of thinking, but I can't, and I won't.
No.
David isn't special. He doesn't impress me.
But Jaime Munguia does?
Well, the funny thing about Jaime Munguia is that he, like David Benavidez, recently fought a common opponent between himself and Canelo Alvarez, and he was able to do what Canelo didn't do. In essence, he was also able to do what David didn't do.
What?
He knocked the guy out. He knocked out John Ryder.
Jaime fought John Ryder after Canelo fought him, like David fought Caleb Plant after Canelo fought him.
David fought Caleb Plant after Canelo Alvarez knocked him out.
But he couldn't knock him out.
In spite of being bigger and younger than Canelo, throwing more punches than Canelo, landing more punches than Canelo, on the same guy, David couldn't stop him. David couldn't drop him.
Apply that formula to Jaime.
Jaime Munguia fought John Ryder after Canelo fought him. But Jaime did drop John Ryder. Jaime did stop John Ryder.
He did to John what David was supposed to do to Caleb.
So spare me the Mexican monster talk. Maybe we should call Jaime Munguia the Mexican monster, since he's the actual Mexican national, not David. David's from Arizona.
Not Mexico.
His mother is Ecuadorian.
Not Mexican.
You waited 4 years to fight Caleb Plant. You could have fought him in 2019 when you were both champions and you were both unbeaten. You waited 4 years just so that you don't knock the guy out?
Canelo threw less punches than you did and knocked him out.
You had to wait 4 years to fight that same guy, and you expect me to believe that he's the one that ain't got no nuts? No, you're just a flavor of the month.
That's it.
I think the door's still open, and they think the reality is like people want to slam the door shut, like, you know, and declare they know what's going on, they know what's going to happen. We've just seen, you know, all those people proven wrong again and again, and more recently on this one. So even if, you know, the Benavidez fight doesn't happen now, I'm not ready to close the book. I'm not going to sort of, you know, stamp my feet and pout that we didn't get it here. I mean, sure, I'm like all boxing fans. I'd like to see that before Canelo, you know, exits boxing. But we've got time for that. And I think the door's still open in September. I mean, who knows?
That's what former Showtime Sports president Stefan Espinoza had to say about it. He thinks the fight might happen in September. Apparently, so does David Benavidez.
What?
In spite of what he's saying, he posted on Instagram. Just wait on it. Don't be surprised when this fight happens in September.
Well, if you think it's going to happen in September, what are you moaning about?
I don't often agree with things Stefan Espinoza says. In fact, I often disagree with most of what he says, but I do agree with him on that because I always thought if Canelo's going to fight David, it's not going to be in May of this year, it'll be in September.
That's what I've been saying.
On repeat, on video, here on this channel.
That's what I've been saying.
Which begs the question, if David Benavidez is of the same mindset and of the same opinion, why is he complaining? Why is he bellyaching? He was never going to be next.
Because he has to wait.
And he has likely outgrown the weight. It's difficult for him to make 168, which is also what I've been saying here on this channel.
That's why he's belly aching.
He's supposed to be fighting Alexander Vozdik in his very next fight up there at 175, and therein lies a dilemma.
What?
Therein lies the problem.
What?
You go up to 175 for your next fight, and you drop back down to 168, it's not going to be easy to get back to 168. It already isn't easy.
Why do you think his next fight is at light heavyweight?
For a guy who's been making super middleweight as long as David has been making super middleweight, trying to, getting there now is physically taxing.
It's all falling into place.
When you do that, when you stay at a weight too long, your physical condition starts to suffer for it, your punch resistance. Why do you think David never fights any punchers? He didn't want nothing to do with no David Morrell. He instead chose to fight a light-punching middleweight who had just moved up in weight, who was in his mid-30s, in Demetrius Andrade.
He had to choose between Morrell and Andrade, and who did he choose? The older guy, the smaller guy, who can't punch.
You better hope David makes it past Alexander Vozdik by hook or by crook. You better hope he doesn't get knocked out up there.
You better.
PBC fighters pensioned for not living up to the expectations set forth by their supporters, by their cult following.
Don't get knocked out.
If he's fortunate enough to somehow make it through that fight, comes back down to 168.
Fights Canelo.
I remember Dimitri Bivol said Canelo punches harder than David.
I believe him.
That's why Canelo didn't have to land as many punches on Caleb to knock him out.
I believe him.
I remember that Vozdik said he sparred David Benavidez, and he's not so much a power guy. It's not power, it's volume.
Target practice for a counter puncher. Target practice for a boxer puncher, a counter puncher, like a Canelo.
By now, you already know what I think. Your issue is you keep hoping that I'll change my mind, that I will endorse David like you endorse David, so you can feel a little bit more confident in him.
Because you know I'm often right.
You wouldn't be here on this channel as often as you are if I weren't.
Worrying about what I think.
No, if I were often wrong, you wouldn't spend this much time on it. You wouldn't worry about it because that Julius guy, that Ring IQ guy, he's often wrong. So who cares what he says?
Except he's not often wrong.
He's often right, and that's troubling.
Can't really feel settled into your prediction unless I agree with you.
But I don't. And I've already said why. I've explained myself.
You just don't want to accept it.
Don't. Keep endorsing these PBC fighters. PBC fighters like Wilder and Spence and Stephen Fulton.
Keith Thurman.
David Benavidez. Keep doing it.
Don't let me stop you.
Don't expect me to change my mind either.
That's what you're waiting for.
And so, David Benavidez' next fight is set to land on the undercard of Gervonta Davis versus Frank Martin. They're being planned to take place on the same show. Benavidez' father, trainer Jose Benavidez Sr., has revealed. Reported date is June 15th on Amazon Prime Video pay-per-view in America.
Like I told you last year, they're gonna double stuff these undercards with a lot of familiar faces, as many as they can, to try to make them more appealing, more attractive.
To the customer, to the consumer. And for David, it's a step backwards, isn't it? I mean, you went from headlining your own shows, headlining your own pay-per-views,
That didn't sell shit.
for all this hullabaloo about David Benavidez online. In the real world, where it counts the most, where are these people?
Where?
David's last fight, the one with Demetrius Andrade, caught in a boxing insider Rick Glacier couldn't even crack 100,000 buys with that thing.
60,000 pay-per-view sold.
And you wonder why Canelo Alvarez says that this guy doesn't bring anything to the table.
Abject failure.
He's been with the PBC as long as I can remember. After all these years at super middleweight, you're still not a star? You still can't sell pay-per-views? You still have to rely on Canelo Alvarez?
You're hustling backwards.
If you went from headlining your own shows and headlining your own pay-per-views, two of them, to being tucked on an undercard, Gervonta Davis's undercard.
Ridiculous.
How many people do you think are going to buy this thing? Gervonta Davis versus Frank Martin. Who is asking for that? Do you think that Gervonta is going to sell with this fight what he just sold with Ryan Garcia? Because if he doesn't, what, you can't do 1 million buys without Ryan? You can't do over 1 million buys with Frank Martin? I thought you were the face of boxing.
And that's not saying I think Ryan can do over 1 million buys without Gervonta, but nobody calls Ryan the face of boxing, where there's a small group of people that like to call Gervonta the face of boxing.
We'll see what he is and what he ain't, as well as seeing who else is going to land on this show, who else is going to land on this card, because when you've got Gervonta on the show and you've got David on the show, those are two guys who normally headline their own shows, and they expect to make a lot of money.
They want to.
We all do. So in order to pay them, well, you're going to need to sell a lot of pay-per-views. It looks more and more like these guys are getting paid off the net. Whatever the pay-per-view brings in, whatever it generates. So, what's it going to generate? In an effort to talk up this fight, Gervonta Davis' supporters have been lying to themselves and others, pretending that all the other guys at the weight have been avoiding him. Guys like Vasil Lomachenko.
Are you serious?
That's what they're saying to themselves, to others, as if the truth isn't just a click away.
It is.
As if the truth isn't a Google search away to see who's been avoiding who.
You want to pretend that Bob Arum has been protecting his fighters from Gervonta? Do you see what normally happens when Bob's fighters, or fighters that Bob groomed,
Fighters that used to be top-ranked fighters, do you see what happens when they unleash them on the PBC? How Manny Pacquiao in his early 40s still had enough in the tank to beat an unbeaten Keith Thurman.
Vosdick damn near killed Adonis Stevenson.
Better be damn near killed Marcus Brown. Terrence Crawford damn near killed Errol Spence. Tyson Fury beat Deontay Wilder so bad, so fucking bad, he resorted to using psychedelic mushrooms to help cope with the loss.
Turned him into a junkie.
You think Bob Arum has to protect his fighters from this butterball?
Stevenson beats him easy.
Devin too. That's why he's not fighting any of them. He's fighting Frank Martin, who arguably lost to Artem Hatatunian.
Am I supposed to think Frank Martin's on the same level as them?
Better hope Gervonta Davis beats him and keeps what little momentum he has going. You better hope he does, because if Frank upsets the apple cart for Gervonta, you can't turn Frank into a star.
That is not a win for the PBC. Even though it's an in-house fight,
That would not be good for business, let me tell you.